Good afternoon, everyone. This is Stacy Weber. I'm an instructor with Pragmatic Marketing, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. Today we're going to be talking about modern competitive intelligence, and joining us is Tim Rhodes, Oracle's former Director of Competitive Intelligence. For those of you who are not familiar with Pragmatic Marketing, we've been specialists in product management and product marketing since 1993. We use the Pragmatic framework to help companies become truly market-driven, to learn to listen to the market in new ways, thereby improving the productivity and effectiveness of their projects. Today, Tim is here to actually dive down into one specific activity within the framework, the competitive analysis area. And so I'd just like to welcome you all. If you're interested in learning more about Pragmatic Marketing, you can poke around on our website. There's lots of great resources available there. Tim, I'll turn this over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. Very happy to be here today and talk about this important topic. We're going to be diving in and talking about competitive intelligence and how to use one of your most important assets, your employees, to gain competitive insights. So a little bit about me. I spent the last 2 years as the Director of Competitive Intelligence at Oracle for the Oracle Marketing Cloud, which was an acquisition of Eloqua, which is a SaaS-based marketing automation platform. In that role, I designed the competitive intelligence program from the ground up, which was inherited by Oracle. And one of the unique things that we did there was create an information sharing program. So we'll be talking a little bit about some of the things that worked there and some of the challenges that we had. But prior to coming to Eloqua and Oracle, I spent 10 years as a competitive intelligence consultant, going in and doing competitive intelligence projects, but also setting up competitive intelligence programs. For instance, at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Florida, we actually did come in and do a CI program at Oracle. So had the opportunity to do 10 to 12 different program establishments over the 10-year period there. So I'll be kind of sharing with you some of the best practices that I learned along the way. So what are we going to be talking about today in this webinar? We're going to really dive in and identify how to leverage internal competitive insights to really help you be able to develop proactive competitive intelligence. And it's really going to be focused around how to get those competitive insights out of your employees, how to develop the actionable proactive competitive insights and distribute them. We're going to talk about how to create a competitive intelligence sharing culture within your company, and then learn how to create a crowdsourced competitive intelligence program with your internal employees. So for the next 45 minutes, I'll be covering some of those agenda items. I will leave about 10 minutes at the end for questions. You can insert your questions in the chat window anytime during the webinar, and we'll answer those at the end. So let's dive right in and talk about why we should even focus on a competitive intelligence sharing program within your company today. Well, one of the things that I've learned over the past 15 years in competitive intelligence is companies with poor information about their competition are really stuck being reactive, and they tend to lurch from defensive tactic to defensive tactic as new competitive products appear, and in their perception, seemingly out of nowhere. And what I've learned is that when companies develop a rich source of intelligence on their competitors' products, their marketing strategies, sales tactics, it can give you some time and an advantage to plan for changes in the marketplace. But in order to have that proactive competitive intelligence, you have to first capture it. Now, there's some great secondary information sources on the web. I am constantly astounded at some of the information sources that are emerging. Some of the ones that I really like that I tend to look at are like G2, Crowd, Trust Radius. These are all customer-generated insights on perceptions of strengths and weaknesses on mostly software programs, but they're equivalent for other product areas as well. But one of the things that I've discovered is that using your internal employees as a competitive intelligence source can gain you some of the richest information about what's going on in the marketplace from a proactive standpoint. And so we're going to be talking about how to do that, how to identify that competitive knowledge within your employees, harness it, and distribute it back out. So one of the things that we're not going to talk about is how to leverage one or two employees for competitive insights. And I liken the competitive intelligence process to a puzzle. If you can imagine throwing 500 pieces of a puzzle out on the table, each piece doesn't mean a whole lot until you start to synthesize the pieces together, put it together, and you begin to get your picture. You can see here on the screen we have a puzzle. You might think about what that might be. And as we put those puzzle pieces together, we can quickly and precisely see some of those competitive insights. And so in this case, what you see is this puzzle is actually a flower. And again, you wouldn't know that necessarily from the puzzle pieces, but as you synthesize it together, you can start to see that pattern emerge. And then competitive intelligence process is very similar. Each piece by itself doesn't mean a whole lot until you start to put all those pieces together. In this case, multiple different sources of competitive intelligence. It can be customer insights. It can be employee insights. But what we have found is that there's very, very rich information from your internal employees. And so some of the internal employees that I tend to focus on are sales and account staff. As we'll talk about, these people have very, very rich sources of information. Your leadership, of course, CEO, CFO, they all have very strong perceptions and may have nuggets of information. Again, we're not going to one of these sources for the entire picture about our competitive landscape. Remember, it's a puzzle approach of fitting all these things together. Your channel partners can be a very, very rich source of information. Your service and support employees, former competitive employees that are now within your company, and then former employees. Now, the former employee part can be a bit tricky, but what I found is that when you develop strong relationships with employees that you know have strong competitive insights, you can go to these people once or twice a year to gain very, very strong competitive information or a piece of it. Now, one of the things that we're going to really focus on is sales staff today. And one of the reasons why is these employees tend to have a very unique perception about the marketplace and about the competitive landscape. They are constantly getting customer perceptions on competitor strengths and weaknesses and their perceived differentiators. Their customers are hearing about new competitive products that are coming into the marketplace, new pricing plans, maybe new sales and marketing tactics or strategies that are about to be released. And oftentimes your sales employees have very diverse background, even with prior industry knowledge coming from a competitor or from a partner. But one of the things that we're just not going to focus on sales employees, but also account teams. And this is something that's often overlooked when a program is put together. Your account teams or your inside sales teams often have very deep, rich, competitive information, just like your prospect-facing sales team do, because they're dealing with renewals, they're dealing with customers every day that are being bombarded with competitive messaging. So it's important when you think about gaining competitive information from your sales team not to overlook other sales and customer-focused employees like account management, your business development reps, your inside sales, and your account teams. They're all rich sources of competitive information. So what I'd like to do now is we'd like to make this interactive. We have a poll on the screen, and we'd like you to answer the question, what is the primary source of your competitive intelligence today? Is it mostly secondary research, things that you're getting from the web, win-loss interviews, knowledge from sales, or you're unsure? And we'll pause there and collect some information, and we'd like to hear what is your primary source of information today. So if we skip to the results, what we see is that a majority of information tends to come from secondary research, and as more live information is coming in here, also from sales, so that's good. Companies are beginning to see the importance of getting competitive information from sales, so that's very, very important. We did a similar exercise in the spring on another webinar that we did for win-loss interviews, and it was about the same, which is positive because we're starting to see more and more companies use their sales teams for competitive insights. So let's talk specifically how to put together a sharing program. And what I found is that there's really 4 pillars to a very successful competitive intelligence sharing program. So moving clockwise here, it's having a culture within your company that's open, collaborative, that's already sharing information. Having a strong competitive intelligence structure in place, someone that can own the process. And we're going to talk about each one of these things here in more detail on subsequent slides. It's having a formalized sharing process that everyone understands and knows about, and that's constantly being promoted. And then it's having tools that can collect information and distribute it back out to the necessary teams that need to consume it. So when we look at each one of these things, they're equally important in terms of creating a strong competitive intelligence sharing program. But let's look at the first one, and that's culture. And this is having a company culture and the internal motivation that's there to collaborate and share. And in my experience, a company that does not have the culture of one that's collaborative or highly cooperative, putting together a competitive intelligence program that uses internal employees for CI can be very, very difficult. Now, we're going to talk about ways to overcome this. But out of the gate, it's really important to do an honest assessment of your own company culture because there's certain things that you may have to do differently. One of the things that we're going to talk about is in a company where there is less sharing and less collaboration, it's important to start small. So, for example, when I was at Oracle, it's very well known that Oracle is a highly siloed company. It's very much what they call a self-service company. There's not a lot of collaboration and cooperation across the company. So what we decided to do is start very small within our own team and create that culture and build it up. And we're going to talk about more ways to do that here in the rest of the hour. But it's important to have that honest assessment. It's also important to have motivation within the company. And this is really around having a leadership buy-in, having manager buy-in to having a competitive intelligence culture, competitive intelligence sharing process. And then it's also important to understand what will motivate an employee to participate in the program and share. In my experience, there's a number of different reasons employees want to participate and share: to express themselves, to support their peers and sharing knowledge, to demonstrate command of knowledge for recognition. And then in many cases, it's just the culture of the organization to share, which is great to have. So sticking with the culture theme, one of the things that we have found is that in companies that are very siloed, this can prevent information flow across the company, and this can create problems when you go about setting up and establishing a competitive intelligence sharing program. The more silos you have, the more difficult it is to tend to share competitive information. But what I found is that you can use these silos to your advantage. And we're going to talk about a couple different studies that have been recently done that show that actually smaller teams share information more. There was a study done in 2010 that was published in the International Journal of Emerging Transdiscipline that suggested that information sharing is actually best conducted in smaller groups where individuals have knowledge and trust with each other. There was another study done in the Journal of Knowledge Management in 2007 that showed that sharing is increased within an organization or a group or a business unit when the information is put out there proactively. That is, when you demonstrate value very early on. There tends to be a positive relationship between trust of coworkers and knowledge sharing in organizations. So we can actually use these silos to our advantage rather than deploying a company-wide sharing process in companies where you have these silos, and that you can actually turn it and use it to your favor, starting small within your team, within your business unit, and creating that trust, creating that sharing culture internally before you move it out to the company. So the second thing that we're going to talk about, well, first just sticking with the culture process, as I mentioned, starting small and moving out, even deploying tools across the company. Just one point here, what I found is just because you implement a tool does not mean that it's necessarily going to be used. And so we're going to talk about how to proactively put out tools that are highly used. But the second pillar of a competitive intelligence sharing program we talked about is having a structure in place. Someone has to own the process. In order to capture and use competitive intelligence, you have to have a process in place. And what we found is that despite there's a lot of advantages in CI, having dedicated CI teams are still very rare. This was actually a survey done from a webinar that we did in the spring, where we polled people on who manages competitive intelligence. And at that time, it was a sample population between 400 and 500 people, and we still saw that 43% of CI ownership was still done at the product line level or the product marketing level. So it's still really rare to have someone dedicated full-time to competitive intelligence. So this makes it even more important to have a process in place, a structure in place that everyone knows, that it's promoted, that it's advertised, that it's common knowledge of the program and the process in place. So what I'd love to understand and share with the rest of the team is your own experience. Who manages your competitive intelligence today? Is it at the product line or product marketing level? Are there dedicated individuals? Is there a dedicated team, or is it all ad hoc with no CI processes? And we'll kind of compare that to the results from the spring that we had and see how different it is here. So kind of skipping to the results, and we'll get some live results put in here that you can see. Overwhelmingly, competitive intelligence from you all joining this call is done at the product line or the product marketing level, 57%, 56%. What's interesting is that you see this 32% is still ad hoc or no CI processes. That's pretty consistent with the poll that we did in the spring that was right at 30%. So pretty consistently we see that a majority of competitive intelligence is still at the product line level or the product marketing level, that there's still very few dedicated competitive intelligence people. So that's why it's even more important to have a dedicated process in place before you roll something out like this. So the third pillar, we talked about having the culture and having an honest assessment of a competitive intelligence culture. We talked about having a strong competitive intelligence process in place with a clear owner, a single person or a single team that owns the process. And then the third is having sharing processes. So this is where you're actually defining the process internally. And one of the things that's important to have is a very strong communication program and building a case for competitive intelligence sharing processes. And one of the things that I found that's important is when you build this case, it's to share it formally with managers, with executives, with leadership, with peers, to really create and build advocates for the program. If you don't have those advocates in the program, it's going to be very, very difficult for a CI sharing strategy to get off the ground. So building a business case is really about getting leadership buy-in, about building management buy-in, and about building advocates within the company. Without having advocates, it's very, very difficult to have a successful program that has any longevity. And then just a couple of tactics, having a centralized place where you can go to distribute and collect competitive intelligence. Simple things like having a dedicated CI email address. When I was at Eloqua, it was very simple at our CI address where people could pose questions or deliver rumors or things that they've heard was just ci@eloqua.com. So just something as simple as that. And then getting more into some of the technological advances that are out there. There's a lot of internal collaborative platforms like Chatter and Yammer, Wikis, Jive, Confluence that can help you not only collect information but distribute it back out to your teams. And we're going to talk about these tools here in our fourth pillar coming up. But then, one of the things that I've discovered in really honing in on the sales and account team is having what I call regular CI sales huddles. And this is really that crowdsourced competitive intelligence that we talked about at the top of the hour. And this is really where you have live regular meetings with your sales teams, your account teams, maybe your business development reps, your inside sales teams. And the idea is to not only collect information, but also demonstrate value of the program back by proactively providing competitive intelligence back to the team. So sticking with that crowdsourced CI huddle theme, let's kind of talk about how to do that. What are some of the best practices? And what I've learned is that these crowdsourced CI huddles on a regular basis, a monthly basis, if you have short sales cycles, biweekly is important. You can attach it to the back of a regular sales call. But having these CI sales huddles really can help leverage the experience of your reps who have won and lost against competitors. So you can harness reps that have won against competitors and learn about the sales tactics and the messaging that they use against a specific competitor or set of competitors. And the rest of your sales teams can hear. So these are calls where you can have it by product line, by geography, or if you have a small enough company, your entire sales team that are learning about how other sales reps have won and even lost against competitors. Because sometimes it's just as important to understand why you lose as why you win. Hearing about lost deals can help the sales rep prepare against specific competitors, and at the same time, you're receiving live information around perceived competitive strengths and competitive weaknesses. So it's really two ways of advantage here. Sales reps are getting information about why they win, why they lose, and learning best practices. And then you as the product line manager or competitive intelligence manager are learning about these key insights. But having these regular CI sales huddles is also about creating a cadence for competitive intelligence within the company. What I've learned is that when you have these regular CI sales huddles, it can actually help create an information sharing culture where one has not previously existed. So these sales huddles can give, not only give reps live access to the information that they need, give you live access to the information that you need, it can also help create a culture and a cadence for competitive information sharing within your company. Now, the approach of these sales huddles is really around brainstorming, and we're going to talk about the process here. But it's really focused on your top competitors, and what I suggest is that each session be limited to one or two competitors. And I like to use the detective metaphor here to focus on investigating how to position against rivals in a specific deal. So, some of the processes that I've learned that can really help to create and facilitate an effective CI sales huddle is having it on a regular basis, regular recurring basis, monthly or biweekly. As I mentioned, it can be added to an existing sales call or a regular meeting, at the end. Heavily advertising and promoting it, especially when you're just launching the program, is a must. And really promoting it around the specific competitor or specific competitive topic that's going to be addressed. What I found is that if you keep it under 45 minutes, it's typically much more effective, with the first 15 to 20 minutes presenting on a learned insight. And again, the idea here is you're demonstrating value to the team by providing an insight, and then the last 15 to 20 minutes is you're soliciting for specific competitive information around that competitor that you announced. Now, in the background, what you want to have is 1 to 2 sales reps that are ready to go to talk about a deal that they're actively in, a competitive deal. And this is where having those advocates and sales manager buy-in is critical to get one or two sales reps ready to go. And so the reps present who the prospect is, the specific competitor involved, and then the competitive situation being encountered. And again, it's important to hear this from a sales rep standpoint because they can hear how the competitor is being encountered, and they can also provide insight to the sales rep on what they've done that's been effective in terms of winning against that competitor. And then the third thing from that is you're getting live competitive insight. You're hearing how the sales rep is encountering the competitive, the competitor, what sales messages the competitor is using, what product feature functionality they're leading with, the customer perception on who's winning in the sales cycle. Those are all things that are important that you can collect live during these sales calls. It's really important that you're allowing attendees to these CI sales huddles to provide feedback on their own experience with the competitor in the sales cycle. So these are just really rich ways of collecting and presenting competitive information, especially to your sales teams. And I found when we did this both at Computer Associates, at Eloquent, at Oracle, we found this to be very effective in improving our win rate because we were learning about customer perceived competitor strengths and weaknesses that we didn't previously know. What we learned is that many times, sitting around and learning and thinking about what are our competitive differentiators, those things may not have mattered to the customer. But when we are soliciting that from our sales reps who are hearing it from the customers firsthand, we're learning and hearing about what matters to the customer. What are their perceived competitive differentiators? What are the customer perceived strengths and weaknesses of our product versus the competitor? And many times that's more important than anything else in really understanding the customer perceived strengths and weaknesses. So this is just an outline that I've learned that is effective. I've used this over the past 5 years from a regular CI sales huddle standpoint. And spending the first few minutes demonstrating value, giving them insights that they haven't heard before, sets the tone and for the rest of the call where they generally want to participate. But it's important to have 1 or 2 sales reps teed up to talk about an active deal that they're in, or it's okay to even bring an active deal that's closed, either won or lost, that they can share and talk about. So, as I mentioned, the CI sales huddle is not, it's not just for collecting information. It's not just about providing, immediate feedback to those sales reps. But in situations where you have a less collaborative culture, it can really help to create a sharing culture and begin to create those initial foundations for changing the culture of the company. And we found that when we employed CI sales huddles, it can often foster creativity on how to compete against a specific set of competitors or an individual competitor. And again, it's all about brainstorming and experience sharing. There's really no evaluation of the ideas being presented. We really want to keep it open so that we keep our sales reps and our account teams motivated to keep coming back. And again, the diverse perspectives are important here because you may have sales reps on the line that have come from the competitor, have come from a partner, or have come from a situation where they know the competitor in detail that can share those insights that are important. And it's really important to hear how sales reps are being successful in selling against the competition, but it's also equally important to hear about how they're losing. Are there things that we need to address from a product delivery standpoint, product feature functionality standpoint that may not be previously known? So these CI sales huddles are really a strong foundation of a CI sharing program in my experience. So we talked about 3 of the 4 pillars. We talked about having a strong competitive intelligence sharing culture. We talked about having a strong competitive intelligence sharing process, a dedicated team or person in place. We talked about different communication sharing processes and now tools. But what I want to make sure that we talk about is that just because you provide employee tools for collaboration doesn't mean that they're going to be used. It really depends upon the culture, the motivation of individuals, the ease of use, and the education and the promotion of the tool that's gone into it that really dictates whether someone's going to use a tool or a platform. In many cases, especially with sales rep and an account team, if you have a tool that's not integrated with an internal system, it can be viewed as another platform. In one case that I know of recently, a customer that I've been working with, they deployed Jive, which is a great sharing tool, but it was completely outside of the company's normal operating platform, and it ended up having very low adoption because they didn't enable single sign-on. They didn't enable this to be used very easily. It was thought of by the sales reps and account teams as another system. And that attitude was very, very pervasive. And so insights were very, very low. It's why I love some of these tools that are integrated into existing systems like Chatter, which is integrated with Salesforce, or Yammer, which you can integrate with your CRM. There's some great real-time sharing tools that are also emerging, like Social Text, Convofy, which is integrated with your Gmail. And it's really important that you create specific channels for CI, whether it's a Chatter channel or a Yammer channel, that you create something that's specific for competitive intelligence sharing. And then the sharing communities are growing also rich in functionality, like SharePoint, Confluence, Jive, Wikis, Huddle, Bloomfire, are all producing great platforms that you can create specific competitive intelligence sharing portals for. Again, it needs to be integrated, it needs to be easy to use, and it needs to be promoted extensively at rollout so people understand where it's at, how to get to it, and it's easily accessible, so there's this not another platform attitude that becomes pervasive. So what I'd like to do is to share with you some best practices on how we put together a pretty successful competitive sharing program at Eloqua. And this was prior to the acquisition by Oracle. And the program was really a combination of having the right culture, of putting together processes for competitive intelligence sharing processes. It was having the motivation of not only leadership but the sales teams, and then having the right tools. And what we did is we understood that we needed to have a strong competitive intelligence framework first. And so we established that. We learned that what tools were being evaluated or being used, and where we could fit in with processes and platforms and programs that were already in place. Second, we knew leadership buy-in was critical. And not only did we have the top leadership buy-in, but leadership actually created a quarterly CI sharing award. It was a simple little award that was shared on a quarterly basis, but it created excitement and motivation and that recognition of employees that were sharing competitive insights. We promoted biweekly sales huddles, and the reason why we selected biweekly is some of our sales cycles were pretty short, and the competitive landscape was changing quite quickly within the marketing automation space, and we chose to have it on a biweekly basis. The sales team was small enough that we did not divide it by geography or anything else. We just opened it up for any sales rep that wanted to participate, and we generally had between 75 and 80% participation rates. We covered only 1 to 2 competitors per session, and we had 1 to 2 sales reps that were ready to come, that were in active sales cycles against those specific competitors that we were covering. Before we launched into getting those sales reps to talk, we provided some competitive insights that may have not already been known, and we were using win-loss information to really power this. So we may provide information on a new product that's being launched within the competitive landscape, or a new sales or marketing tactic. And the idea here is to provide value, to demonstrate value of the program, so that each one of the sales reps can personally understand that they're going to get value out of participating. And then we open up the call for general questions and feedback on the specific competitors being covered. And then we had 1 to 2 sales reps bring in their current sales cycle deals against those 1 to 2 competitors. So in this case, at Eloqua, our primary competitors were companies like Marketo and Pardot and Silverpop, the SaaS-based marketing automation competitors, and we would have them talk about who the prospect is, what their point of pain was, really dissect the deal from a detective-type standpoint, and allow other sales reps to talk about how they've been effective in dealing with those competitors, but also soliciting feedback from those that have also lost, so those sales reps can prepare. And at the same time, we're collecting all of this insight, these pieces of the puzzle of competitive insight. So it's not just for the sales reps, but it's also for us as product marketing and CI people to collect that insight. And then we used existing tools to communicate in real time this information back out. And because we're using Salesforce.com for our CI or for our CRM, we chose to use Chatter. Now there's lots of great tools on the marketplace. We just chose to use this because it was already integrated into the platform, and we would avoid this attitude of another platform that they would have to log into and use. And we created a competitive intelligence sharing channel on Chatter, and it ended up being one of the most active because sales reps could ask questions, we would promote information that we were finding, and we would do a recap of the sales huddles through Chatter so they could see live what was being said about these 1 to 2 competitors. It became very effective to the point back in 2011 or 12, we knew about Salesforce's acquisition of ExactTarget 3 months ahead of time based upon what sales reps were hearing from customers. And customers were hearing from ExactTarget and Salesforce that this acquisition was coming, and we were actually able to prepare for the acquisition 3 months ahead of time based upon this program. So, very effective in not only strategic positioning but tactical positioning, learning how to win against the competitor. So what are some of the obstacles that can get in your way putting together a specific CI program? Well, the big one is people unwilling to participate. And again, this kind of goes to the culture of the company. A lot of employees, can view something like this as another thing that's not contributing specifically to the job. So it's really understanding how to position this to motivate employees to participate. The culture of the company, this is a big one. As I mentioned, it's critical to have that honest assessment. No leadership buy-in. If you don't have leadership from the top bought into this program, it's going to be very, very problematic to have something that's effective or any sort of longevity. Tools that are not convenient to use, as I mentioned, if you have a tool that's not part of a single sign-on process or that is not easy to log into, you're going to have very, very low adoption. And then companies that are highly siloed, that don't have the culture of sharing information between groups can be problematic. The other thing that I learned is however long you think it's going to take to deploy a CI sharing program like this, multiply it by 2, because there's always something that's going to go wrong. And we learned from multiple different programs that we were implementing, both as an internal employee and as a consultant. There's different things that you're not going to see that are going to come into place. And so it's important to give yourself enough time, usually doubling the estimated time that you're going to be able to roll out a program before it's effective. So what are some recommendations? What are some things that you really need to consider to have an effective program? As I mentioned, leadership buy-in is critical. Having employee buy-in is critical. This is why developing a formal business case that you share with everyone is critical. Showing what the process is, the program is, expected outcomes, everything down to the detailed level. And I shared it with everyone, starting at the top, going all the way down to sales reps, sharing on sales calls, getting feedback, getting buy-in, developing those relationships and developing those advocates that can help you push this forward. And then, as I mentioned, having an honest assessment of your culture and the company's willingness to share information and collaborate is critical, because it's really going to dictate how you launch and move the program forward. It's important to educate and even over-promote the system and the CI sharing process and the sales CI huddle. Over-promote it. I would promote it, almost to the point where I feel like I was spamming it, because it's important that people understand that it's out there. I would share it live in sales meetings, in company meetings, on Chatter, on our internal wiki system. It's really important, especially early on, to remind people that this program exists. And then especially in highly siloed companies or companies where the culture isn't as collaborative as you would like it to be, starting small. We did that at Oracle. As we started very, very small with a geographic sales team, launched and moved the CI sharing program within that team and then started moving outward. So you can start with a product-based team or a geographic-based team and move outward. And the idea there is you get buy-in, you get an internal case study, people start talking and talking about the value of the program, and it can really help to shape perception. So, it's okay to start small and move outward, especially in a company that's large. It could be siloed, or the culture isn't one that supports a lot of collaboration. The other recommendation that I have is using tools to reinforce competitive sharing. So basic rewards and incentive, and having incentives to participate really does work. So when we were at Eloqua, we created what was called a certified Marketo hunter. Marketo was one of the competitors at Eloqua. We had little pins and badges that you can see on the screen here. We had a logo made up for the hunter. Someone that participated in a CI sales huddle call got a mug with the label on there. Cost us $4 to make. Really easy, but it went a long way. People would talk about how they were a certified hunter. They talked about the program. It created a positive perception within the team and within the company. But also making it fun. Some of the CI sales huddles, we would change up the structure and do a game format. We would play Jeopardy to collect the latest competitive intelligence that sales reps were having in sales cycles. So making it fun, making it light, especially after you get it off the ground, can increase participation, keep people wanting to be active in those CI sales huddles. And then it's also important to measure your success and track your overall success moving forward. And one of the best ways that I've learned from a competitive intelligence standpoint is tracking your overall competitive win rate and specific competitive win rate before and after the program. So we understood what our overall win rate was in competitive sales cycles, and then competitive win rate against a specific set of competitors, and we measured that. We had about a 50% win rate before the program, and afterwards we had about a 68%, 6 months after the program was developed. I mean, it's not a linear cause and effect, but there's definitely something there that led to an increased win rate. And we also surveyed the sales team, and we got their feedback as well. But we wanted to show that we were affecting the bottom line, so we would use survey data, but more importantly, we used win rate data to show and measure how our programs were effective. So overall, using those 4 pillars of creating a CI sharing program is really important. Is doing that honest assessment of your culture, and really understanding what your company culture is and what are some of the potential challenges, having that CI structure in place, putting together a CI sharing process that includes regular CI sales huddles, and having tools that you can use that can harness competitive information and also distribute it back out are effective. So we've got about 15 minutes left. So what I'd like to do is, Stacy, should we open it up to some questions?
Yeah, that sounds great, Tim. If you want to submit questions, you can all just type the questions into your interface, and we'll see those here. And, Tim, I did get a few questions during the presentation as well. You want me to just dive into those?
Absolutely.
All right, excellent. The first one, would you recommend to use a different CI domain per product or per market segment, or what level do you think would be appropriate?
Yeah, I mean, I always come from the KISS principle, keep it simple. And, we tried using different domains, and what we found is that just from a tracking standpoint, it could get difficult. So just keeping it simple, keeping it where everyone remembers, the address, something simple, CI at your company name, and, educating your employees and your sales reps to put the right type of domain level information in the header or in the message body is good enough.
All right, so collecting it all through one central point, but then tracking kind of what level that competitive intelligence is really about.
Right.
Yeah,
If you create it, if you make it too complex, it can really spiral out of control from a management and a measurement standpoint.
Exactly. Either really spin out of control or stop completely, in my experience.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Exactly.
If it's tell you that they won't. All right.
Yep.
Another one here. Would you? Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go back. Understand the emphasis on a sharing community, but obviously there still needs to be an owner. If it's not CI specific, should it still be a product manager or product marketing manager? And the person asking the question is a PMM and says no one else seems to take ownership, which doesn't surprise me a whole lot.
It doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me either. From the poll results, we found, what was it, 43% only have an owner for CI. So, this person's experience is not unique. I think as a default, it's important to keep it within product marketing. Ultimately, having someone dedicated to CI is important. I mean, there's some issues that I'm actually writing about today. Having CI within product marketing can create more of a tactical sales focus where you lose that strategic implications of the competitive landscape. But for a lack of better placement, product marketing is a great place, to keep it. It's close to, typically close to sales. You can schedule those CI sales huddles, but having a central ownership. In my experience, if you distribute CI ownership over a team, it's just not going to work. Someone has to own it. It has to be part of their job description. So in lack of having someone dedicated, assigning competitive intelligence to a PMM, is generally a best practice.
Yes, and I would agree there. It always seems also like the PMM deserves to have this because it's a way they can really show true value back to that sales team, which then helps build the relationship and helps them get their job done as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
A few more here. What are some specific data points you found helpful to record the competitor information? What kind of data points, basically, they're asking?
Oh, so within sales calls, I'm assuming, well, I mean, I think a couple different things. Understanding customer perceived competitive strengths and weaknesses versus your own product, your own offering. I think that that's basic importance. And using the sales rep and the account rep as the vehicle, for that, of collecting that. So they're hearing what the customer perceptions are on competitive strengths and weaknesses from a feature functionality, delivery point, offering level. I think that's number one. Number two, collecting how they're positioning the product is important. So getting the sales rep to really focus on and listen how the customers are talking about this and positioning it, so you can understand how the competitors are positioning this from a sales and marketing tactic, messaging, promotion standpoint. Those are the top two that are important. Some of the other ones that if you can, in addition to feature functionality and messaging, I mean, pricing or pricing models always important. Future product rollout. There's some customers that, competitive sales reps will leak that or talk about how they're going to talk about their product roadmap. Getting that level of information is always important. As I mentioned in the case study at Eloqua, that's how we understood Salesforce was going to make a major acquisition 3 months before they did, was because someone gloated and talked about how they were going to do that to a prospect.
Excellent. What are the names of the web sources for CI that you mentioned?
So I'm assuming that the person was talking about the study information. One was the Journal of Emerging Transdiscipline in 2010, and then the other one was the Journal of Knowledge Management in 2008. And if he wants to email me, I can actually share those specific documents.
All right. Excellent. Thank you. Here's a good one. Which do you typically find to be more useful? Knowing the overall reasons buyers buy or leave a competitor, or B, feature-to-feature comparisons?
I always find the first one, the overall reasons why buyers buy or leave, because from that you can get the perceptions on what's most important to the customer, which is really what matters. So understanding from the customer level what they think is most important and how they view competitive differentiation. I'd much rather have that than feature-to-feature comparison.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. That feature-to-feature comparison doesn't really tell us much because you don't know
Right.
whether those features are used or whether they're impactful to the market.
Yep, exactly.
And then a follow-on question to that one. Also, do many CI programs produce assets for external use? And would they run into legal issues doing that?
I mean, I think that's a very good question. So to answer the first part of that, yes. And it really depends upon who owns CI. If it's within product marketing, generally you have an individual that's motivated to provide something to the sales force to increase win rate. And what I found very effective is understanding what are the top 5 reasons why we win and lose against a competitor, and packaging those up in a consumable format that sales can use one-on-one with the prospect. You don't have to name names. It can be very high level. Here are the 5 reasons why your company versus the competitor. It can be shared in a ebook or an infographic format or a white paper. And we actually would do that at Eloqua, is collect that up and put it in unique formats like infographics that are easily consumable. From a legal standpoint, where you run into problems is if you drop names. And if you collect information that's confidential. So if a customer passes something to a sales rep like a competitive document that's marked confidential, maybe it's a pricing document, a master agreement, all of that stuff is protected and you can't use that. And that's where, again, having a dedicated person in CI that's experienced, that knows what's legal and ethical and what isn't, is important, because we obviously don't want to collect anything that goes beyond that line.
Sure. Is the next one, is there any concern that sales rep information may be questionable, especially when it comes to price?
Absolutely. What's the number one reason that we hear from sales reps why they lose? It's price. In my experience, that's usually the feedback that I get from sales reps. So absolutely. We generally, as a rule of thumb, will not use a piece of information, especially in something that's published or used internally, unless we hear it from a second independent source. So, if we hear something from the field like competitors getting ready to launch a new product, or a customer views this product feature as a strength, we'll want to get a second source confirmation before we run with that piece of information. It's always a good rule of thumb is, even from an evidentiary standpoint in our legal system, it's having that second or third witness that's important to prove something. The same is true in CI, is having at least 2 independent sources that can really focus on something so that you understand that it's true, especially price. Because pricing is so difficult. There's discounting involved. There could be elements of the pricing model that you don't know about. It's really, really difficult to go with a single source of information, especially related to price.
Yes. I absolutely agree. And, and the salesperson who's hearing that information doesn't always have the ability to even verify whether it's accurate information or not. And so I always agree. I always look for two sources to be, at least two sources to be agreeing on that piece of information before I really rely on it.
Yep, exactly. Especially if you're going to produce, a sales enablement asset that sales reps are going to be, using for their own consumption, whether it's a Seligman's guide or a battle card, and especially if it's something that you're producing that's going to be external facing, you want to have, that second independent source to really qualify that piece of information.
Yeah, exactly. The damage I watched at one point it was a fairly well-established competitive intelligence program. However, some of that inaccurate information got in there and got published internally, but still the loss of trust that the sales team had in that system was pretty drastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's and that can devastate a CI program. But the opposite side of that too is a piece of information can become part of company lore, if you will, right? Great example is when I was at Eloqua, first joined in competitive intelligence. The company perception on why we won against our number one competitor was totally different than what our customers were saying. The internal perception, based upon this company lore that is passed on, was that we were winning on product feature functionality superiority. But when we dug into our win-loss interviews and we talked with customers, the actual reason why we were winning was the exact opposite. We were winning because our sales reps were taking the time to educate the prospect on how to use our platform to be more successful at marketing, where our competitors were selling on feature functionality. So the exact opposite can be true as well.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Let's see, we've got time for another one here. The question is, are there good case studies on either good CI programs or bad CI programs? Do you know a source for some case studies?
There's obviously lots of case studies that are available. Some presented by some CI vendors. I know the Harvard Business Review has a few. Right off the top of my head, other than the ones I've been directly involved in, I can't think of any specific sources other than Harvard Business Review. I'm sure there are. I can definitely, if that person wanted to email me, I could definitely direct them in the right place.
All right. Sounds good. We're almost up to the time. Tim, do you have any kind of closing thoughts?
I think the biggest thing is, if you have someone that's dedicated to competitive intelligence, it's really about buy-in, as I mentioned, getting leadership buy-in, creating demonstratable value very early on with early wins, and promoting your CI sales huddles. The CI sales huddles are one of the most critical components of the foundation to a program that you can have, because your sales teams are the closest to the competitors than anyone else. They're out there in sales cycles and talking with customers and prospects every day. And so if you can do one thing, it would be putting together those CI sales huddles on a regular basis.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is a great idea. The exchange of information would be very helpful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Tim, and thank all of you for attending today and joining us for this month's session of Pragmatic Live. Next month's webinar is going to be called Humanize Your Marketing with Buyer Personas, so watch for information on that. The recording from today's session will be available shortly on our website, so you'll have access to that as well. Thank you much for joining, and everyone have a great day.